relax. Be present in your body. Sit back in your chair. And don't work so hard, Gil. Stop running after things the whole time and start letting things come to you. By slowing down, by connecting to your senses, and by trusting that the answer will find you. I'm 29 years old and facilitating my first therapy training session. So I'm surrounded by all of my classmates, and I have this client in front of me, and I'm completely absorbed by the story that he tells. And my focus is out there, and I'm ready to give him the most profound insight he's ever had. And when I suddenly feel a tap on my shoulder, and it's my teacher, Will, giving me this feedback to relax and to be present in my body. And I'm in shock, because I sense from a very deep place that he's right, and at the same time, I have no idea what he's talking about. I don't know about you, but I was raised to run after things, to perform, to be successful, and to do stuff. Nobody really asked me how it was to be present in my body and connect with my senses. My parents were divorced when I was 6 years old. And I remember when I introduced myself at the age of 7, 8 in a new group, I had this very specific phrase, and it was like this. Hello, my name is Gilles. My parents are divorced, but I came out of it just fine. Yeah. And it was actually a phrase that I adopted from my mother, because I always heard her say this to people who informed about our situation. And since nobody really asked me what I was feeling inside about this whole thing, I just thought that she spoke the truth. So I adopted that phrase, and after a few years, I started to believe it. Yeah. Every 2 months, my younger sister and I went to visit my father, who lived in a small apartment in those days, on his own. And what I remember most of those visits was that he was always smiling. He was also reassuring us that he was doing fine. But that smile confused me, because I was 7 and I felt with every cell of my body that he was not doing fine. He was sad and he was alone. But because he couldn't connect with that sadness, I couldn't connect with him either. Let alone that I could connect with my own sadness. So I concluded that this is apparently the way that grown-ups deal with pain. Hide it behind a big smile. And since my father was my hero at the age of 7, I decided to do the same. And so I grew up, an outgoing, extrovert and creative child on the one hand, genuinely liking to join the playback show or the school's theater play on the one hand, and getting a lot of applause for it. Yeah. At the same time, there was this whole inner emotional landscape of anxiety and fear before I got up on the stage. But whenever I tried to communicate that feeling of anxiety and fear, it was either minimized by telling me I shouldn't bother, I always do fine, or it was rejected by telling me I was exaggerating and being a drama queen, or it was ignored. And so I did what every child does at that age. I started to overdevelop my successful performing side, and I started to neglect and repress all these negative emotions that came along with it. And in time, this grew out in a big tension in my body and exhaustion, a growing gap between my inner vulnerability and my outer strength. And somewhere in my 20s, this gap reminded me of my father. It was a reflection of what I noticed him doing when I was very young. And at that moment, I decided I wanted to travel a different path. I knew from a very deep place that moving away from the sensitivity and moving away from the anxiety was not the way forward. I had to find a way to move into it. And this brought me to this moment of shock at the age of 29, at the beginning of this therapy training, where suddenly someone offered me a whole new way of being present in reality by letting things come to me. And it was the start of a love affair, a relationship with a universal, ancient symbol that we all vaguely know, but that I was going to study more closely. And there it is. Yin and yang. Beautiful symbol. Two equally powerful energies inspiring each other from without, as you can see by the dots in the middle. Yang is the white side. It's the masculine side. Yang represents the sun. And the light of the sun sheds its light over reality so that we can see reality, that we have clarity, that we can structure it, that we can have an overview. Yang is all about rational thinking, and it is oriented outwardly. Yang is all about going for results, going for goals. Yang is about growing things, about quantity. It is result-oriented, and it is all about going for the destination. On the other hand, you have yin. That's the dark side. It's the feminine energy. It's about navigating your way in the dark, not seeing things clearly, not knowing with our senses, but we have to trust on a deeper kind of knowing, deeper kind of senses, trusting our intuition to find our way. Yin is the birthplace of creativity and innovation. Everything that wants to emerge from the dark, and yin is turned inwardly. Yin is about self-reflection and about slowing down, about being present in the moment. It's not about result orientation, but process orientation. How are we doing while we are going for the destination? It's not about growing, but about sustaining. It's not about competition, but it's about cooperation. Yin is all about enjoying the voyage as it unfolds. Unfortunately, we have come into a culture where the situation more looks like this. A lot of yang and a little bit suppressed, shrunken yin, which is actually a very logical consequence of a collective history we share. For ages and ages and ages, public life was given shape by only half of the population, by men. So it's only logical that the systems and the structures derived from that are based on masculine values, which has brought a lot of prosperity and wealth in the world. But in time, we see that things were getting out of balance. And when yin and yang are not inspiring each other anymore from within, the qualities can get toxic. So masculine values can become toxic, and feminine values as well. And you get the beautiful masculine value of, or quality of being decisive, for example, turning into dominance. Or being focused, turning into a tunnel vision. Or the healthy focus on control becomes tyranny. And toxic yang can invoke toxic yin. So you have the feminine quality of being indirect and diplomatic becoming manipulation. And this process orientation, how are we doing, becomes over-analyzing, over-reflecting on relationships and not being able to take a decision anymore. And the beautiful feminine quality of taking care becomes giving yourself away, self-sacrificing yourself. And of course, you start to hear that we are talking in stereotypes. Indeed, things are getting out of balance, and before we know it, we are putting each other in boxes that are dictating how to behave. And so in literature, it's described how we speak of a man box that dictates men to be strong, to do it alone, and to fix the problem. And on the other side, you get this woman box that dictates women, unconsciously of course, and for centuries, to be quiet, to be invisible, and to sacrifice yourself for the bigger whole. And I realized that this might just start sounding like a talk on gender, but actually it isn't. Because yin and yang, by their very essence, are two energies that are supposed to run freely through men and women, each in their own proportion, according to the human being, according to the individual. But it became an issue of gender from the moment history decided that only half of the population could create public life. And at that moment, yang became the norm. the normal, the standard. It became for ages and ages, it crawled into our bodies in a very unconscious way. And the norm, the standard, has a tendency to look down on everything that deviates from it. So Yang started to look down on Yin. And for me, that reflects a big taboo in modern society today that touches me a lot. And that is the taboo on men not being allowed anymore to develop their feminine qualities. It was only 3 weeks ago when I heard a mother at the bus stop yell at her 10-year-old son. I think he was about 10 years old. He was crying because he was in pain. And I heard her say, like, stop crying, stop behaving like a little girl. And it was, oh my God. It was such a small sentence, and it's so recognizable, but it was so sharp for me because it said, it showed me how unconsciously we are sustaining these stereotypes and passing them on to our children. Stop behaving like a little girl. Crying is for little girl. Crying is weak. We have come to a culture where the very definition of a man has become everything but feminine. Yeah. And there's a beautiful verse of a poem by Henry David Thoreau, which describes for me very painfully the outcome of a culture where this yin and yang have drifted apart. And the verse goes like this. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation, and they go to the grave with a song still in them. They go to the grave with a song still in them. Can you feel the waste of potential? Are you still singing your song? What would you need to sing it more loudly? Men and women. Time? Maybe time to turn inward. Time to slow down. Time to be present in your body, navigate your way in the dark and see what wants to arise from there. Even in this time of history, with all the progress there is, it still takes a lot of courage to do that. It takes courage for a man to really stand up for his feminine quality and own them. It takes courage to just reach out and ask for help without judging that as weak. It takes courage to admit not to know the answer as a leader or as a father. It takes courage to share uncertainty and doubt, and also to stay connected with the uneasiness that brings about. It also takes courage for a woman not to panic when a man gets out of his cage and starts exploring this feminine potential. There's a book by Glennon Doyle, the title is Untamed, where she describes how her best friend, who was very conscious of stereotypes and everything, how her best friends described her that she felt disgust, because her husband the night before broke down and cried because he was worried about their financial situation. And she says to Glennon Doyle, like, oh my God, here I am with all my awareness, and the only thing I could think when he was crying was, man up, solve the problem. Yeah. And then and Doyle responds like, this is so normal, because of course we women are infused by society's notions on masculinity. So Glennon Doyle decides, and she says we have to decide: do we want our men and husbands and fathers to be strong and alone, or do we want them to be free and connected, like is on the next slide? Do we want them to be strong and alone? Do we want them to be free and connected? So, men and women, how much courage are you willing to show? How much potential are you willing to open up? Do you still detect stereotypical thoughts within yourself or within your neighbor or partner? And do you have the courage to challenge the other on that? To talk about it? And are you willing to stay present with the discomfort that this brings about, the uneasiness? Suppose you would have to deliver a keynote on reintegrating the feminine within this very masculine TEDx keynote format, regarding the structure, the deadlines, and the timing. I still have 1 minute and 50 seconds left. Would you choose dancing to navigate the anxiety? Of course, we all have to find our own way to navigate into the discomfort. But if there's one thing that I have learned of that this voyage of the past weeks and months has shown me once more, it is that our only way to start rebalancing these beautiful yin-yang energies in the world again and in ourselves is by moving into vulnerability. And in doing so, I wish each and every one of us the courage to start moving through the pain of our collective past and embracing it fully. And from that place of recognition and acceptance, face the future with an open heart. Thank you.